This has to do with an article in the Wall Street Journal on the 3rd of February, yesterday, by Melissa Korn, K-O-R-N. I want to give her credit. And I was struck by this story. I don't know how many of you saw it. The story is about education, college education in the United States, and who goes to college and who graduates from college, and what that looks like. And the numbers, I found them so arresting, I wanted to share them very briefly with you because they seem to me to give an insight into what is going on in the United States and what we're moving towards that is remarkable and kind of stunning. Here's the story. A group of researchers, particularly in Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania, asked the question, what percentage of people who come from the richest quarter of our population, the highest quarter income, what percentage of them go to school, finish college, by the time they're 24 have a BA degree, and compare that to the bottom quarter. So it's the same number of families, but you compare the richest family to the lowest family. And here's what the results are, and you can get them in the Wall Street Journal if you want, and there's a bit more detail than I have time for here. And these are numbers for 2013. They're the most recent for which the research could be done. 77% of young people from the richest quarter of our population, 77% have a bachelor's degree by the time they're 24 years of age. Bottom quarter, 9% of the people in the bottom quarter have a bachelor's degree by the time they're 24. 77% are getting college degrees from the richest, and 9% from the poorest. 1 in 5 of those from the poorest who go to college finish. 4 out of 5 drop out along the way. For the top, 99% of those who enter finish. Whoa, what are we learning here? We're learning that the education, the degree, is something clearly associated with the wealth, the income of your family. You have a degree because you come from the right place, and you don't have a degree because you don't come from the right place. You come from the poor place. Yet we pretend, don't we, that this is a society that's either committed to or based on, we only give you a job if you are qualified. Well, how would you get qualified? Mostly you have a degree or you don't. So we're basically saying qualified, but what we kind of mean is you come from the top, you get the job. You come from the low, you don't get the job. You're the one who's fired first, you're the one who's hired last. Do we help the people? A claim made by liberal folks a whole lot. Do we help the poor go to college? Well, these numbers suggest that whatever help we give isn't working real well. But let's look at the numbers. The most important grant the federal government gives to needy students is something called the Pell Grant System, P-E-L-L. And these numbers, and just hold them in your head, there aren't that many. In 1974, the average Pell Grant was $4,690, which covered roughly half tuition, room, and board that a student would have to go to. In 2012, the most recent numbers, the average money was $5,550. That's not a lot more. Meanwhile, the prices have gone crazy. So here's the wonderful result in the Wall Street Journal. The Pell Grant covered roughly half of a year's school in 1974. It covers 1/4 of the cost of a year now. The money that we give to the poor, the effect of it in terms of their college cost has dropped by half. Instead of paying half of it, it now pays 1/4 of it, which helps explain why either they can't get into the school or they can't stay in the school since their financial troubles will be enough to throw them out. I want to say one more thing about the gross injustice of this. the gross injustice, because what we're doing is we are denying, that's what these numbers show, we are denying people in the lower half of the population one of the few ways they might get out of that dilemma, which is an education. This is not available to them, becoming harder for them to finance, not easier, that's what the numbers show. And so that we are cementing a difference not only of income, but a difference of income that is now compounded by a difference of qualification, which will be the most certain way to keep that differential and that inequality growing over time. That's why this points into a future that ought to scare you. But you know, even in college, and I spent my whole life being a professor at colleges and universities around the United States, and I still teach at the New School here even now, I've always been amazed and taken aback that American students don't object more to the grading system. I give a little speech at the beginning of every semester where I apologize to my class for grading. I explain to them that I am not here to determine whether you are a B potato or a C potato or an A potato. And I can't possibly evaluate your mental capabilities by reading a couple of things you wrote under duress in an exam situation when you hadn't digested your breakfast properly and your girlfriend had just said things to you that made your mind blow up. I'm now going to give you a grade as to how you performed. This makes no sense. And it has nothing to do with education. If you want me to educate you, then I have to read your writing over a period of time. We have to have conversations. I'll give you my opinions. They may or may not be you. That's it. That's a reasonable way to... We don't do that. We give you these pressurized exercises and then write an A or a B or a C, and I apologize to the students. This is offensive. This is unfair. And I'm as honest as I know how, and I say to the students, I do this because I don't want to lose my job. They require us as professors to do this. So I'm going to do it, but I don't have to like it, and I don't have to approve of it. And then the students always raise their hand, and that's why I want to say the next thing. Well, then what is it really for? You hate it. We hate it. Why are we doing this? And I explain to them, the administration, it's a pain for them too. They have to keep all these records. Who cares? And the answer is, somewhere there has to be a reason for this. So I'm going to offer you one. Our system, our economic system, creates jobs mostly if enterprises think there's profit to be made by hiring a person to do something. In other words, we subordinate the employment decision, giving a person a job that he or she has been preparing for and studying for and likes to do, or whatever the motivations are. We give them a job if and only if it's profitable for somebody else to do that. And if it isn't, you don't have a job. You know, it has nothing to do with usefulness. A 10-minute walk out of the building here will show you 50 things that need to be done that could employ thousands of people. Clean the streets, rebuild the cities, have the daycare center. You know, we all know. It's easy. So clearly, we don't give people jobs because there's something useful to do. We don't give them jobs because nobody's making any money. So here's the problem. In our capitalist system, and this is really true now, it was always true, but it's true in spades now, there aren't enough jobs that are profitable. And this is a difficult thing. Why? How do you go to the American people and say, you know, we're terribly sorry to tell you that you're living in a capitalist system and you've got a lot of energy and a lot of creativity and you studied real hard and you're smart as a whip and you're fired. Or better yet, you're not even hired ever. You wanted to be a physicist? How about, I don't know, barista? You can study how the steam goes through the coffee and write a paper for your grandmother. There aren't the jobs, and it's very hard. How do you explain it to people? If you explain it the way I'm doing it now, you're going to make critics of the system, because you're saying you are all victims of a system that can easily identify loads of things to be done, but it can't work out getting you, who want a job, doing what we can all see needs to be done. So, because the system is so fundamentally irrational, you have no job. Have a nice day. The system can't do that. So the system has to work out a way that the absence of work, either of any work at all, or of work that has any relationship to what you've been trained to do, or has any relationship to what you would love to do and would capture your passion and your creativity, the inability of the system to provide that has to be explained to you in a way that doesn't make you anti-capitalist. And here's how we do that. Grades. No, I'm really serious. Grades. I give you an A. I give him a B. I give her a C. I give her an A plus, whatever I do, and it has a wonderful function. It means that employers who don't have enough jobs anyway will give it to the A's. And the beauty, the B's and the C's who don't get a job, this is the good part, will blame themselves. They weren't good enough. They didn't do studying enough. They took the wrong courses. They majored in the wrong topic. They buttered up the wrong professor. Whatever it was, they failed. And instead of being angry at the system, they'll go and have a lot of extra drinks because they feel bad about them. This is a technique for social survival, to have the victims of a system blame themselves. It really isn't very different from what feminists taught us some years ago, that if somebody attacks a young lady who has a tight blouse, the problem isn't the blouse and the lady, it's the problem of what's going on in the brain of the attacker. We're not without jobs because we got a B or we got a C. We're without jobs because there aren't enough jobs and somebody has to take the fall. You're it. You got a B and you're going to blame yourself. For most of the last 50 years, Connecticut ranks as the richest state in the United States. It either ranks number 1 or 2 or 3 every year, and number 1 most years in the last 50. It is wildly wealthy. It is the home of the most highly paid executives in New York who live in Greenwich, in Darien, in places like that, for those of you that are not familiar, not very far from here. And it has a very wealthy suburbs around Hartford, its capital. It is also a remarkable state because of the contrast within it, which is also emblematic of America. The Census Department of the United States keeps a list of the poorest cities in the United States, large cities. That's cities over 100,000 people. And the way the Census Bureau measures this is it takes the number of families that live below the poverty line as a numerator in a fraction, and below the line in the fraction are the total number of families in the community. So you're poorer depending on how large that fraction is, how big a proportion of your families have an income below the official poverty line. Connecticut ranks number 1 again because unlike any other state, it has 2 of the 10 poorest cities are in Connecticut. Wow. Hartford and New Haven. If those contrasts weren't enough, richest state in the Union, 2 of the poorest cities in the country. In New Haven, one of those 2 poor cities, you have in the middle of this poverty-stricken city the 3rd or 4th richest university in the world, Yale University. Sitting there, for those of you who've never visited New Haven, be my guest. I lived there for 35 years. I went to school at Yale, I taught at Yale, I got married, I had children, I stayed in New Haven. I don't live there now, but I live longer there than anywhere else in my life. I know the city inside and out. The richest university in one of the poorest cities in the United States, and the governor of the richest state in the union can't find the money to keep open at a decent price the state university attended by the people who aren't rich. Because if you are rich, you go to Yale or something like that. It is an amazing state of contrasts, emblematic of the United States. Last part of the story, because you're going to like this. Yale is not only the richest entity in the state of Connecticut, with assets in the many billions of dollars, but because it is a private university, get ready now, here we go, it is not required by American law to pay taxes. So on the billions of dollars of stocks it owns, it earns dividends. The tax bill on the dividends from the federal government is nothing. They own 200 buildings in New Haven. Yale is spread out in the city of New Haven. 200 buildings. The land and the buildings would, if they were owned by anybody else, be taxable, raising money for the city of New Haven. But because it's Yale, they don't pay any property taxes, like everybody else, to the city of New Haven. The city of New Haven is a poverty-stricken city hosting a university. The citizens of this poor place pay high taxes. Why? So someone has to make up for the fact that Yale doesn't. When Yale has a fire alarm because its students smell smoke, the city sends fire trucks. Yale doesn't have its own fire trucks. So the city sends a fire truck. Who pays for the firemen and women and the trucks? And the citizens do. The citizens do. The air that is cleaned so that the students don't get emphysema is paid for by the citizens. Ready now? New Haven, the 7th poorest city in America, subsidizes by its taxes the delivery of free public services to the 3rd richest university on this planet. That's called, this is a technical term, Robin Hood in reverse. It's called stealing from the poor and giving to the rich so that they can get richer quicker than if they had to pay. You can't make this stuff up. You live in this. It's replicated everywhere. What I just told you about Yale applies to Columbia, applies to NYU, and it applies to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and to Harvard in Boston and Cambridge, and Brown in Providence, and on and on and on. It is the most amazing redistribution of wealth one could look for. Only it's not in the direction that conservatives worry about. That's why they don't worry about this. This is a redistribution they can and do endorse, from the poor and the middle to those at the top. But don't worry, if this is a part of capitalism that's not so pretty, Robert Reich and Hillary Clinton are saving it. All right. Even though it's very recent and we try to take a look at what happened over the last month, I really have to bring to your attention, which I suspect for many of you isn't necessary, but I'm going to do it anyway, the very remarkable events of the last few days in Columbia, Missouri. If you did not notice, you should, because something there happened that is a straw in the wind and no minor one either. For those of you that were busy and didn't catch it, even though it got quite a bit of publicity, let me quickly remind you. The University of Missouri, the main campus is in Columbia, Missouri. And like many universities in this country in recent years, it decided under weird circumstances, that is, the usual ones, weird circumstances, that it could improve a lot of its performance as a university if it was run like a business. There seem to be an awful lot of people who think that if everything is run like a business, it will do a lot better than if it isn't run like a business, even if it isn't in fact a business. And what tends to happen is if you run something like a business, it becomes more like a business, which, if you're a university, is at best a mixed event. University of Massachusetts, I was about to say it's where I taught, the University of Missouri in this case, brought in a businessman who could be better equipped to run it like a business. And he proceeded to do that, displaying what is usually the real issue, which has nothing to do with business, it has to do with cutting costs. But it doesn't sound good that we're going to bring somebody in who's going to fire a lot of people and reduce the quantity of toilet paper in the bathroom. That doesn't sound so good. Doesn't even sound so positive. Whereas running it like a business, that sounds much better. You know, it's the American desire to convert the bus driver into a transportation engineer and things like that. So we're going to run the University of Missouri like a business. And one of the first creative acts of a Mr. Wolf, no relation, spells it differently, who was the head of the university, was to take medical insurance away from all of the graduate students doing the teaching and the adjuncts. This is cute. This is a clear improvement in the quality of education, don't you think? Teachers are going to do a much better job in the classroom if they have nowhere to go when they get sick because they can't afford a doctor. This brilliant move saved money, which is, of course, what running it like a business is. By the way, the running it like a business is cute also because when the workers, the employees of a university, now being run like a business, decide to join a union, which is what workers in businesses do, they get a big lecture from the university about how we don't need to have a union in a citadel of learning. It stops being a business when that would be raising the costs. It's really only a business if you cut the cost. So they did. They cut the graduate student. That made the graduate students rather unhappy. And the same fellow, suggesting a link that you might want to think about in your life, the same fellow was remarkably unactive when it came to dealing with clear examples of racial discrimination and racial prejudice directed particularly against African Americans among the students, who brought complaints about various events to his attention. But he was so busy taking the medical insurance away from the teachers that he had no time or space to deal with the complaints of students describing incidents on the campus that anybody who isn't strange would have realized demand a lot of attention and not to be ignored. But he ignored that in the way that business-run universities tend to do. That was a big mistake. Two things happened. A growing number of students, black and white, got upset about his not doing anything about these events. One of them went on a hunger strike, saying that he wasn't going to eat anything until this president was out of there. And everybody scoffed in that nervous way people do when they don't like something that's happening, but they don't really know what to do about it. And so it sat for a few days, this fellow getting sick. I mean, he wasn't eating anything. And then an even more interesting thing happened. the African American athletes on the football team at the University of Missouri got together and announced first to their coach, I believe the coach is white, yes? Okay, so the coach is white, announced to the coach that they were thinking of protesting, and they had an interesting way of doing it. They wouldn't play football anymore for the University of Missouri. This was stunning. They got themselves together, those students, and they did that. And they confronted the coach, and that meant the coach now, and I'm being a professor all my life, I know how this game is played. The coach is in the middle. Now he's getting the pressure from the students that are his athletes and his team, and that's his career. And he's an agent of the administration who's supposed to, and he has to make one of those great choices that you hope you don't have too often in your life. And that man had the courage, and he made his choice. He went with the students. And he announced that he was with the students, there would be no more University of Missouri football games. Now you're going to learn about how a university nowadays really is a business. Because that's how universities now make a lot of their money. By bringing people to the stadium to watch the football games, by signing contracts with the television stations to broadcast the football. And now they had found the weak link of the run the business, university like a business. They said, okay, you're going to play that way. We're going to let you learn something. It's a lesson that applies to all businesses. If the workers don't do it, you don't have a business. The minute workers understand that, the power relations in our society are turned on their head. Those who have it discover they don't have it, and those who never thought they had it discover they do have it. That's why it's a very dangerous moment. In 24 hours, the president of the University of Missouri was gone. The board told him, you have a lovely choice, Mr. President. You have, 40, 50 minutes to resign, or we're going to bounce you out of here. He chose to resign because that's less dangerous for his career. But nobody is fooled. He resigned because the people upon whom that university depends for its money, the students, first and foremost, the faculty, which had mobilized because the senior faculty had empathized with the graduate students. After all, they're students who had no more medical coverage because of this business genius in his way of running the university. But the important historical thing is, it's like a parable. It's like a Bible story, what we're listening and we're watching here. The people rose up and they said, no more of this. And the people in charge said, we will do what, we'll run like a business. Yeah, okay, bye-bye, you're gone. And nobody quite knows. It's in the front pages of a lot of newspapers. It got a lot of attention because even the people who like to keep these stories secret were struck by how fast it all went. Once the lines were clear, boom! The people with the power had none, and the people with no power had just won what they set out to win. Will not be quickly forgotten, and you can be very sure in every college athletic program, nothing else is being discussed but that. And in many of the universities, my colleagues have been flooding me with emails talking about this, trying to understand how it's possible, or in the case of, since they know who I am, begging me to explain to them why it hasn't already happened in their university, as they hope it will, and as they will now make a little contribution to having that happen too. So it's a remarkable thing. Next, higher education. Well, I've been a professor all my life, so I'm a bit sensitive to this business. So I beg your indulgence to let me talk about it with you for a little while. Over the last 2 decades, and particularly since the crash of 2008, we have seen this country, the United States is what I'm talking about, go through a round after round of tax cuts. Politicians running against one another, promising to cut your local tax, your state tax, your federal tax. The Republicans in particular, but they're successful enough that many of the Democrats, particularly the conservative ones, do it too. Okay, so let's follow the logic. We have tax cuts. Then, when the crash happens in 2008, we also have the austerity that is put forward as the way to handle the economic troubles of 2008. And austerity means that you cut government spending, which you would have had to do anyway because you've been cutting taxes for so long. Okay, so what that means is that higher education is particularly whacked here. Why? Almost 80% of people who go to college and university in the United States go to a public school. So higher education is a public industry in the United States, not a private industry. Since I know this comes as a shock for those of you who live in the world of the New York Times, let me say this again. Higher education is not a private enterprise sector of our economy. It is a public, overwhelmingly public sector. If you cut taxes and if you cut spending because of austerity, one of the places that's going to be hurt and not have money the way it used to is public higher education. The community colleges, the state universities, the universities of each of the 50 states, et cetera, all the public higher education. And they have. Over the last 20 years, their budgets, the money they get from the local government, the state government, and the federal government has been cut. Okay, so keep that in your mind. What have the universities done? Well, they've been stung and they didn't know what to do. So they've done a combination of two things. One, they've jacked up the portion of the costs of higher education that they demand from the families and the young people going to the schools. You have to pay more. And every state, you can see the numbers, they're crystal clear for the last 20 years. The relative portion of the cost of higher education in the public sector borne by the individuals that are in the school or their families has gone up. So the state is withdrawing from funding higher education, and the public, you, are being asked to pay more. The second thing they've done, because that is resisted, why is it resisted? Because our income distribution is getting unequal. We've been there already today. And so the mass of people are having a harder and harder time, and that's happening at the same time that more and more for higher education is demanded of them. This is an impossible situation, and they push back. So the university has a second, the public university procedure, not only to demand more from the people going to school, but to give them less. How do you do that? You put more people in a classroom. You get rid of the tenured professor who has a high salary, and you substitute an adjunct. A wonderful word. Condensed form would be junk. Adjunct is usually a young person, although nowadays it's lasting so long that you can get into ripe middle age or beyond. And you get paid a fraction of what they used to pay the tenured professor. And you run around to 3 or 4 different universities in a 40-mile radius. You become exhausted, you develop diabetes, you have no time to read anything, and you try to cobble together a life as an adjunct. There are thousands of them here in New York. It won't take you very long. You'll meet them, talk to them about it. But what you're giving the student is not a professor who has the time and the leisure to go to seminars and read books and attend conferences, to be able to teach with the ability to formulate his or her idea. None of that. You have an overworked, underpaid, exhausted character who has no time for anything other than the bare minimum and is leaving one school to rush to the next one in order to have a life. So you're delivering crappy education. By the way, I'm not suggesting that the full professors who used to be were all that great either. So don't misunderstand me, but you're asking an impossible. So you're giving less in the way of instruction and you're demanding more. This is not usually a recipe for good news. But let's go back. The young people caught up in the catastrophe of 2008 are already seeing the cost of education go up because the state can't support it, and are seeing the quality of what they get go down. But they dare not react to this situation in the way you might expect, which is, if I'm being charged more for less, I'm not buying this anymore. They can't, because the unemployment that explodes in 2008 makes everybody think that the only way to save his or her situation is to go get more degrees, finish school, get your BA, get your MA, get it, because the job market is turning to crap, and you may save yourself if you have, you'll beat out the other poor character who didn't get that education that you, so they all run, you can see the enrollment row, they go up in 2008 and 9 and 10 out of desperation. But of course, since the incomes of all these people are depressed, their families are in trouble because the economy has gone nowhere for 20 years and gone down after 2008. The cost is going up. They've got to go. They're trapped. So they do what trapped people do. They get desperate. The form, they borrow money. Now we have to borrow money to get the degree. But the economy is going down faster than you can prepare for it. So we have more and more people getting a degree, borrowing like crazy, and then discovering it's not a ticket to anything. You're going to be the best educated barista Starbucks has. That's what you're going to be, because that's what there is. This produces fury, depression. This is a very bad situation. It is a kind of destruction of where most people get their higher education, which is in the public sector. It doesn't affect the private schools that much, particularly the upper echelon ones that are floating in money anyway. Why? Because the places like Harvard and Yale and Princeton get their money from the rich, who leave them something when they die, who give them a, and the rich have gotten much, much richer, so their base of support is flush. Everybody else's isn't. It's part of the 1%, 99%, but worked out in the particular way in the realm of higher education. And that has led to two things this last week, which is why I spent the time on this that I did, that I can tie in together. One, for the first time, under tremendous pressure, the government of the United States, about a week ago, forgave about, I believe it was in the neighborhood of $30 million worth of student debt. These were students who had borrowed money to take a course from one of the private schools, Corinthian by name, some of you may know about them, which has now gone bankrupt. So the government can't recover any of the money it's forgiven the students. The students don't have to pay the loans they took because the Corinthian University was what they call now a degree mill. It sucked money out of the students. It particularly went after students who couldn't possibly take a college course because they had never learned in high school how to write or how to do any of this. They helped them fill out the forms to get the money. The money was paid to the university so the young person could go. The young person fails out after 6 weeks because no one has helped them prepare, and the university keeps the money. It lets in 10 times more students than it knows it has to teach because they're all going to drop out. So it's a way of getting the money into their hands. That's how capitalism works. See, it's a private enterprise college, and it used all modern business methods. It ran it like a business, and it really made a lot of money. You want more things to run like a business, don't you? Don't you? That's what they did. But it was so gross that the government has now forgiven $30 million. Whoa, if other people who've borrowed for their house, people who've borrowed for their car, people who've borrowed by using their credit cards and were treated abusively, were crookedly treated, were swindled. Imagine if they all heard the story that the students don't have to pay back anything because, if a lot of other people got that idea, this country's economy would come to a screeching halt. So be sure to let nobody know what I just told you. The second thing is even more amazing to me. It's being pioneered by Purdue University. That's not the chicken people. It's a university, fairly well-known university, who is partnering with a couple of firms to offer to students a new option for paying for college. You are really going to love this because this is another brilliant business idea. Here's how it works. Investors, that's a very kind name for people with more money than they can spend on goods and services, so they invest. Investors create a pool of money. You ready? Students dip into the pool. Students want some of that money. It's not a loan. It is an investment in the student. Here, Sonny, here's 10 grand to help pay your college bill. What does the investor get for making available 10,000 or 5 or whatever it is? You ready? A percentage of the income the student earns over the first 5 or 10 or 15 years that he or she works. You got that? No, in America, this has a name. No? You remember from your early colonial history? Indentured servant. We can't call it that because indenture, whatever that means, sounds like something wrong with your teeth, right? Indenture is not a good thing, and servant is for sure not a good thing, so we can't call it that. We call it an independent, scholarly investment. What? Yes. Remember? Bus driver feels better if his name is now transportation engineer. Feels much better. It's very American. Purdue is seriously engaged in a program that they plan to present to their students so that the gap between rich and poor, which means some people have enough money to make such an investment, will actually now project into the future. Because for years to come, the people who get that investment will be taking a portion of their income and giving it to the people rich enough to make the investment in the first place. That takes the inequality in the country and extends it into the future. It's so American. Again, I would like, if I don't have the time, to stop and play the national anthem. It is such a brilliant business innovation statistic that Mr. Obama knew last night because the numbers are fresh. We've just crossed the $1.3 trillion level of student debt in the United States. $1.3 trillion. Now let me just give you an idea of what that means. Okay. 70% of students graduating from college now have debt. In other words, more than 2/3 of the students coming out of college are carrying debt. That makes 40 million Americans now accumulated carrying student debt. Only 37%, I'm sorry with the numbers, but only 37% of these 40 million are actually paying down the debt. 2/3 of the people, of the 40 million, are carrying the debt. They're not reducing it. They're just living month to month, paying off the interest, if even they can do that. there are more statistics, but I don't want to spend your time. This is a disaster of that's much worse than it was 8 years ago. What are we doing? We're burdening an entire generation of what are presumably our youngest, our brightest, our most motivated young people with a whole added layer of economic difficulty that's going to affect every decision they have. And we've done the studies. We know it affects whether or not you get married. We know it affects whether or not you have children. We know whether it affects you can afford to buy a home. A lot of economic consequences of the load of debt that is simply accumulating faster than anyone had foreseen. $1.3 trillion. The debt of our students is therefore now much higher than the total debt in credit cards carried by all Americans. So before it was credit card debt, mortgage debt, but now student debt has zoomed up and taken its place. You might have thought that the injustice of this, Germany a few months ago decided to abolish all tuition. Let me say that again. Germany decided to abolish all tuition. We decided to load up our students with debt. Interesting difference.